Enormous human and material losses were inflicted on American and puppet troops. The puppet army started to disintegrate. 200,000 troops deserted in the first week. Some went back to their villages. Others came over to our side as unit, including one armored unit with its tanks. One of the most important military results is that our forces have secured new bases in and around the cities of Vincennes. A new phase in the war has started.
According to some commentators, the National Liberation Front forces did not receive the support they expected from the urban population. Is this correct?
Still not. We could not possibly have carried out an offensive of such a tremendous scope without the support of the people. This support was the decisive factor in our success.
You say a new phase of the war has started. How is this expressed?
The war has moved from the countryside to in and around the cities and American bases. Before, the Americans considered the cities their safe rear from which they could launch attacks against our forces in the countryside. Now the cities are frontline areas. Our bases are established in the city outskirts, and our rear is partly in the cities themselves. Our bases in the city outskirts are linked with our rear bases in the jungle and mountains on the one hand, and with the urban population in the cities on the other.
According to the Saigon communiques, there are about 12 NFL troops killed for every one American killed. Is this correct?
Even highly placed Americans do not believe such nonsense. Even McNamara refused to confirm them. If one believes such figures, our forces would have been wiped out many times over. It is a known fact that for the American Second Command, every Vietnamese killed, women, children, and old people are listed as Viet Cong dead by body count.
Some Pentagon spokesmen say that the NFL is on the verge of collapse, and the attacks against the cities were a last desperate act. General Nguyen recently said in Saigon that he was going to beat the Viet Cong this year. What is your comment?
We can safely let the future reply to this. In fact, our offensive succeeded beyond our expectations, both in the military and the political fronts. It was not some sudden act, but the logical development of our people's war. If anything is on the verge of total collapse, it is very much the Saigon regime of Hieu and Nguyen.
Professor Nguyen Hieu, member of the Central Committee of the National Front of Liberation of South Vietnam, has agreed to reply to some questions regarding the results of the recent offensive by the National Liberation Front against the towns and cities of South Vietnam. Professor Hieu, according to the Pentagon, the recent offensive by the NLF against the cities in South Vietnam has been a failure. What do you consider the most important military results of your recent offensive?
For nearly a month, the Pentagon tried to take American and world opinion. But now, even General Westmoreland has finally admitted that our attacks against the cities and main bases has forced his command onto the defensive. As a matter of fact, Westmoreland had lost all operational initiative from last October at the beginning of the 1967-68 tri-season. But he hid this from the American public. He has been on the defensive ever since and can never recover the initiative. I think that without being immodest, our armed forces carried out an offensive unprecedented in military history, attacking on a front of over 1,200 kilometers. Our forces occupy, in part or in whole, 37 out of South Vietnam 40 provincial capitals and another 100 district centers. That is to say, almost every town and city of any importance from the 17th parallel is north to the Khmer Peninsula in the south. Key military installations were attacked on these centers. All four zonal headquarters of the Saigon Queensland military regime were seized, as well as almost all provincial administration headquarters. 8 of 11 division and command posts were seized. 45 airfields were attacked or occupied. These include 11 of the 14 major American air bases in South Vietnam. 1,500 planes and helicopters were destroyed on the ground. As a result, air activity over South Vietnam has been drastically reduced. If we speak only of military results, the Americans themselves have admitted they have been forced to withdraw troops everywhere from the countryside to try and defend the towns. They and their Queensland puppets have been forced to abandon even that small part of the countryside they still control at the time of our offensive. Enormous human and material losses were inflicted on American and puppet troops. The puppet army started to disintegrate. 200,000 troops deserted in the first week. Some went back to their villages. Others came over to our side as unit, including one armored unit with its tanks. One of the most important military results is that our forces have secured new bases in and around the cities of themselves. A new phase in the war has started.
The second series of attacks on February 17th and 18th were weaker than the first attacks. Was this because of a weakening of NFL forces in the first action?
On the contrary, the second attacks were a logical consequence of the success of the first action. Rocket and mortar fire was directed with great precision against virtually all the most important American military installations from positions secure in the first attack. Our forces hit airfields, munition dumps and oil storage depots, power facilities, radar installations, transmission facilities, communications. We will continue to hit such installations from positions secure around on U.S. bases and logistic centers throughout South Vietnam. Although the main blow was directed against military installations from positions secure in the first attacks, we also attacked certain other urban centers not attacked in the first series of assaults.
According to some commentators, the National Liberation Front forces did not receive the support they expected from the urban population. Is this correct?
Still not. We could not possibly have carried out an offensive of such a tremendous scope without the support of the people. This support was the decisive factor in our success. After first trying to pretend that he knew all about the attacks, General Westmoreland now admits he was taken by complete surprise. Tactical surprise, he says, but in fact it was a strategic one. The fact is that we attacked 140 towns. The Americans claim we infiltrated 8 or 9 battalions of troops into Saigon alone. Our forces have no mode of transport. It was the local population of Saigon and other cities who helped carry supply, who hid our arms and munitions, who hid and fed our troops. Many hundreds of thousands of people in the towns of all South Vietnam helped our troops for days on end before the attacks were launched. And there was no betrayal. Absolute secrecy was maintained. It is difficult to imagine any greater demonstration of the total support our forces received from the urban populations. Several American senators, by the way, were quick to note this point as evidence of the total lack of support for the Saigon Quistlings.
You say a new phase of the war has started. How is this expressed?
The war has moved from the countryside to in and around the cities and American bases. Before, the Americans considered the cities their safe rear from which they could launch attacks against our forces in the countryside. Now the cities are frontline areas. Our bases are established in the city outskirts, and our rear is partly in the cities themselves. Our bases in the city outskirts are linked with our rear bases in the jungle and mountains on the one hand, and with the urban population in the cities on the other. Our first wave of attacks entirely changed the strategic position of each side. Before, it was a big problem for our main forces to approach major American bases. Now, the problem of approach no longer exists. Our forces are there permanently. This is why we can launch attacks even against Saigon's Tanzanian airport in broad daylight. We attacked this sub-guarded base 9 times within the first week of our second round of attacks. On the afternoon of February 24th, we destroyed the joint American puppet military command headquarters and numbers of planes parked on the runways. Such attacks will continue, not only in and around Saigon, but in and around all other bases. American forces are more than ever dispersed in fixed positions. They have lost their mobility and possibility of offensive action.
According to the Saigon communiques, there are about 12 NFL troops killed for every 1 American killed. Is this correct?
Even highly placed Americans do not believe such nonsense. Even McNamara refused to confirm them. If one believes such figures, our forces would have been wiped out many times over. But as you know, General Wheeler, on his last visit to Saigon, warned that our forces were still very strong, capable of vigorous new attacks at any moment. What is absolutely criminal is the use of American air and naval power against the civilian population in Saigon, Hue, Mito, and many other cities. The use of B-52 bombers in the outskirts of Saigon and Hue, the use of napalm against populated areas of Hue and other cities. It is a known fact that for the American Saigon Command, every Vietnamese killed, women, children, and old people are listed as vacant dead by body count. The crime against our people in the cities of the South will never be forgotten. As far as our forces are concerned, we are still there, stronger than ever, reinforced by tens of thousands of young people from the cities and entire unit of the public army which have changed over to the side of the people. The fantastic figure put out regarding our losses are to cover up the extremely heavy losses United States forces have suffered, often in trying to achieve prestige successes. This is just one more element among others in deceiving American public opinion and making their lengthening casualty list more easy to swallow.
Some Pentagon spokesmen say that the NFL is on the verge of collapse and the attacks against the cities were a last desperate act. General Nguyen recently said in Saigon that he was going to beat the Viet Cong this year. What is your comment?
We can safely let the future reply to this. In fact, our offensive succeeded beyond our expectations, both in the military and the political fronts. It was not some sudden act, but the logical development of our people's war. If anything is on the verge of total collapse, it is very much the Saigon regime of Hieu and Nguyen.
What do you consider the main political results of the offensive against the towns?
There are many. The collapse of Saigon power in the countryside, the destruction of whatever grip the Quisling regime still had on the cities, as instance, among other things, by their collusion with the American aggressors in destroying South Vietnam cities to save them, as one American general expressed it. The townspeople, within a few hours or days, saw with their own eyes the barbarities that have been inflicted on our people in the countryside for years past. They saw with their own eyes the heroism of the NLF forces, the fascist ferocity of the American and Quisling forces, the fact that the latter tried to cling on to power by using American troops and tanks in the streets of Saigon, Hue, and our cities, shooting down people in the streets from American helicopters, bombing with high explosive and napalm in the heart of our cities. All this has exposed the true face of the American aggressors and the Quisling traitors that served them. For the type of neo-colonialist war the Americans are waging, they need the myth of a local administration, a local army, a local power which they are supporting. They need to maintain a base of power in Saigon and the countryside. But this base has now collapsed and can never be restored. This is a strategic political defeat of primary importance for the American recognized all over the world. The natural result of the collapse of the Saigon administration, the complete discrediting of the Saigon regime, is the creation of the new political and administrative organizations. People's self-management committees sprang up in the cities to take care of day-to-day affairs. New political forces like the League of National and Peace-Loving Forces in Saigon and Hue have made their appearance. There is a ferment of new political activity now growing out of the ruin of the Hieu regime.
You mentioned the League of National and Peace-Loving Forces formed in Saigon and Hue. In its first proclamation, the Saigon League declared it would be ready to act as a mediator between the U.S. Command and the National Front of Liberation to bring about a withdrawal of American forces and the formation of a coalition government with the NFL. What do you think of this?
As I have just said, there is a ferment of political activity and there are new political forces demanding the overthrow of the Turkey regime, seeking a way to recover our independence and bring about peace. It seems to me that the League of National Democratic and Peace-Loving Forces has this in the forefront of its policy. Regarding these new political formations and especially the League, the Presidium of the NLF defined its position in a statement on February 8. This stated that the Front supports these patriotic organizations and is willing to undertake common actions with them. This position is absolutely in line with the Front's political program.